super delighted to welcome back Catherine to the App Promotion Summit stage. She was one of the top-rated speakers at last year's event, and so we're always delighted to welcome back our top speakers again to do another round. And yeah, really happy she's able to join us here. So hopefully everyone can see what's going on. I'm going to ask you to give Catherine a big App Promotion Summit Berlin welcome to the virtual stage to Catherine for round 2 at App Promotion Summit. Please give her a hand.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be back again this year, and I'm especially excited to be talking with you all about retaining customers with out-of-the-box thinking. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Very cool. I'm also following along in the chat, so cool to see there's another Berliner as well. So who am I? If you didn't see me last year, I'm Catherine Bostien. I was raised in Silicon Valley in an entrepreneurial household. I graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in English literature, and I've been working in tech for about a decade now. I'm currently working as a senior CRM growth manager at Delivery Hero, which is a delivery service which functions all across the world with over 37 different brands. This is what we'll be touching on today. So we'll be starting with the introduction to the concept of out-of-the-box thinking, and then looking into how to identify the box that you're in. Then we'll dive into some real-world examples and close with some key takeaways that you can hopefully bring back to your work on Monday. Also, please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I will make some time for us to be touching on those at the end. So there is a poll that I believe is currently running that is asking what's the top CRM strategy is, or what the most effective CRM strategy is for long-term retention. And we have some numbers coming in. It looks like 20% of the population has voted for using automation to re-engage customers, something that if you saw my talk last year, you know I'm very passionate about. And the 80% of users actually think that offering customers surprises and rewards is the best CRM strategy for long-term retention. And actually the answer is yes, sometimes maybe. It really depends on your particular audience and understanding what your audience needs at any particular given time. And oftentimes our answers to a question like this will be driven by assumptions that we have, and we might not even realize that these assumptions are driving a lot of the decisions that we make and the beliefs that we have. So this is why it's important to start understanding the box that we're in. And the box that we're in is actually kind of our categories that we're thinking of the world in. So I love this GIF because you can see that people who are in the box are thinking in the category of boxes. They just draw kind of different shapes of boxes. And in a lot of ways, this is actually applicable to the way that we see the world or that we interpret the world, oftentimes without even knowing it. So the first step to unconventional thinking and developing this unconventional thinking to eventually apply it to your retention strategies is to identify the assumption box that you're actually in. There's a famous developmental psychologist named Jean Piaget, and this quote is one that I think really sums it up well. What we see changes what we know, and what we know changes what we see. And Piaget's theory of cognitive development, he was one of the first people to start defining how we learn as people and as children up into adulthood. And the way that he defined this was that we learn things in categories. So we have a category of chair, or we have a category of table, and we start to define these things or objects into categories, but those could also be concepts or ideas or beliefs. And it's really helpful to think about the world in this way because we don't need to worry about a lot of the details. There can be a chair that has a back to it. There can be a chair that has no back to it, but we can still categorize those together as chairs. And that makes this process of assimilating new things quite easy for us. What becomes difficult is to accommodate new learning. So when we have to create a new category for something, that has a lot more cognitive effort associated with it than when we assimilate something into a category that we already have or already know. So an example of this would be that a child learns from his or her context that women tend to wear dresses and have long hair, but then goes into the world and finds out that, and sees a woman who is wearing pants and has short hair. And this doesn't necessarily match the idea that the child had of what a woman is. And so obviously there's many ways that a woman can be, or then the child needs to assimilate this into the knowledge of this category. And why this is important for us in our work is that these types of categories and this type of way that we see the world can result in things like the false consensus effect. And the false consensus effect is when our own beliefs or characteristics cause us to overestimate the number of people who would actually agree with us or have the same characteristics and beliefs. And one of the first studies on the false consensus effect was run by Ross and his team at Stanford University. And what they did was they had students come together and either decide or not decide to wear a sandwich board. And this is a sandwich board, as you can see. And it's something that you wear kind of over yourself, and it's typically meant to promote a business. And so of the students who did agree to wear the sandwich board, 62% of them thought that other people would also agree to wear the sandwich board. But of the people who refused to wear the sandwich board, they only thought that 33% of people would actually agree to wear a sandwich board. And so you can start to see where our beliefs about ourselves and our understanding and perspective of the world around us can influence how we see other people and the beliefs that we have. And this can actually lead to us having certain beliefs about our customers, for example, that aren't true. So I have a personal experience with this from Delivery Hero. When I started, there was a general consensus about the ordering preference of our customers in in one of our brands. And the agreed upon number was somewhere around 90% of our customers prefer to order on the weekend. And we all kind of agreed on this, and it sounded reasonable to us because we typically ordered on the weekend. During the week, we were in the office and we were going out for lunch, but on the weekends we were home, and that's when we would order in. And finally, we dug into the data, and it turns out 67% of our customers in this brand preferred to order on a weekday. So it's almost the exact opposite of what we had held as true for a very long time. And it's kind of funny in hindsight, but also to think about the amount of effort that went into promoting certain types of communications on a weekend. These are the types of things that can happen if you're basing something on the false consensus effect or this belief that you have about your customers, which may or may not be true. So it's important to keep that in mind. And these assumptions can actually come in many different forms. So that was a behavioral type of assumption that we had about our customers, driven by this false consensus effect, but there can also be other forms. One of those can be rewards. So the type of rewards that we think that our customers would want based on the type of rewards or offers that we would want ourselves. The channel that we communicate to the customers on, the tone of voice that we have when we communicate to them, what we would like isn't necessarily what our customers would like. The frequency that we contact them, this is also one that's been very interesting in working at a company that's in so many different countries, because the frequency with which me and my team would like to be contacted isn't necessarily, and actually is not at all, the frequency which people in other countries want to be contacted. In some countries, it's double what we would think is normal for the frequency of contacting users. And in other countries, it's much less. So also content, it can come in the form of the type of content that you send your users. It's something you might find interesting, but is not necessarily what your customers would find interesting. Life cycle definitions, this is a little bit related to behavioral, but thinking about where you think the line should be drawn for churning customers or active customers even may not be what actually is supported by the data. Strategic, this is kind of thinking about how you're influenced also by past work that you've done and thinking about, okay, it's worked in the past and maybe I think this should work in the future, or it's worked for me, or I think this sounds best, but it actually might not be the best way to drive retention. And lastly, the flow. So how are your communications spaced? How are the campaigns spaced out? Is it just kind of a gut feeling, or is this something that you have tried and has actually worked in an experiment? And to go back to kind of what we had initially talked about in the poll, this is a great quote by Brian Balfour, and it kind of touches on this point that there is no one-size-fits-all tactic or strategy that works best for retaining your users. There's a lot of different approaches that you can take, and even combining different tactics and strategies is probably going to end up being the best way to retain your users. If there was just one way to do it, I would have probably written the book and I'd be living on a beach, but I'm in Berlin. This is an example of, there's a lot of complexity. So in the self-operating napkin, you can see there's a lot of different pieces that go into this to making the self-operating napkin function. And I like to think about every piece of this as being something calculated and very understood, because if any of this was an assumption, then the whole thing would probably break down and it wouldn't work as it's supposed to work. And I think you can apply this as well to your campaigns, especially as the things that you're running or the work that you're doing becomes increasingly complex. The more important it is to either simplify or to reduce the number of assumptions so that the overall campaign will function as you hope it will. And the way that you can do this leads me to my next topic, which is question and test. My high school teacher, English teacher, will probably be very disapproving of this, but test all the things, question all the things. And that's what we'll be discussing in this next section about some real world examples of when I have questioned assumptions, or my team and I have questioned assumptions, and found ways to better retain our users through doing these. So the first one is, how can we turn an outdated assumption into a future-facing framework? I didn't even put it here because it's such a famous quote, but Ford famously said, if I had asked them what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And this is often the case when it comes to assumptions. If we have an assumption, we'll just create a better version of that assumption and move on. But actually, what we can do is start to take apart the different pieces of the idea or whatever we're trying to accomplish, and create something completely new and interesting from that. And so this is one way to take an assumption and then use it to actually think out of the box and create something new and even better than what was there before. And I'll share one example of this process. We, at Delivery Hero, one of our brands is Food Panda. And we had a campaign, our churning campaign was using different voucher value and minimum order value combinations. And these weren't performing as well as we had hoped because they were based on outdated data. And we asked ourselves, okay, well, why are we using these voucher values and minimum order values? And the answer was, well, it worked in the past. And this is a form of assumption that because it's been working, or it was working in the past, that we could just do the same thing and it would work again. But actually, what we decided to do instead was to think about a new way to make sure that the vouchers that we were giving users were as applicable as possible. And so what we did was come up with 150 different possible voucher variations across 14 different countries and sent it to about 1.5 million users in several different languages. And we were able to find out that segmentation based on a user's specific attributes was the best way to segment the vouchers. It performed any other way of segmenting our vouchers. And now what we have, because we did this experiment, it led us to this realization, and now we have a machine learning driven framework that regularly learns from our data in real time what voucher is working best for a specific user. And this wouldn't have been possible unless we had started to question the assumption that we had made about our voucher values. And I saw in the list of attendees that some of you are working at smaller companies or startups, so maybe you don't have 1.5 million users to test on. That's totally cool. You can still run something like this. You just have to have a little bit more patience, because if you don't have the volume of users, then you can actually split your users, the treatment group and the test group 50-50, and then over a period of time, you'll have enough results that you'll be able to get significance about which values are performing better than others. The second question is, how can we challenge the conventional wisdom to lead more innovation, and how asking questions can help overcome the white coat effect? And just in case anyone's not familiar with this terminology, conventional wisdom is an agreed upon knowledge at a certain time, period of time, where it's generally accepted by most people that this is the right way to do things. It's kind of a best practices for a time period. And the white coat effect is an effect that's been seen, especially in doctors' offices, but also in kind of medication commercials, if you have those in your country, where somebody wearing a white coat will tend to get more attention, more speaking time, and not be asked as many questions as somebody not wearing a white coat. And people don't tend to speak up, especially this is a problem in the doctor's office, and ask questions or challenge something that somebody in a white coat says. And there's an interesting study that shows that encouraging patients to ask questions by giving them a predefined list of potential questions that they might want to ask actually helps to mitigate this white coat effect. So they start to speak up. They don't necessarily take everything that a doctor says as 100% truth. And we can take this learning actually into our line of work and think about how to challenge conventional wisdom by asking similar types of questions. Why are we doing this? Does this make sense? What parts of this make sense? What do I agree with? What do I not necessarily agree with or want to challenge? And by asking those types of questions, you can start creating things that are innovative and new. If we always stuck with the conventional wisdom, we wouldn't necessarily move forward. So I'd love to share an example of this from my work, where when I was working at Lyft, which is a ride-sharing company in the US and Canada, that we had followed the conventional wisdom of having a frictionless funnel. That was kind of the ultimate thing to have, was a funnel that was super easy to sign up. I think at one point we even had only 2 things that the user needed to do in order to sign up. But then we started to look at our retention numbers, and we realized that we weren't necessarily getting the kinds of users that we wanted to. And we were asking ourselves why. We started to run some experiments around re-engaging users that weren't as engaged before, but we realized, no, these users, a lot of them are just kind of what we would define as bad quality users. And so we decided to run an experiment, actually using CRM tools, but making them look like in-product pages in order to add additional friction to the sign-up funnel. And we added a couple extra steps there and got additional information from the users, which, if you're familiar with the work from Nir Eyal, also goes into this idea of getting users to invest more information into the app in order to keep them better retained. So we were challenging conventional wisdom, but also using some ideas that were pretty new at the time. And what we found was that we actually were able to get what we defined as higher quality users who were better retained in the long term by adding additional friction to the funnel. And this challenged kind of everything that we had believed at the time, but it turns out that it did end up working. And this is the third example that, and last example I would like to share with you. It's touching on how we can improve our ability to think creatively. So if we're trying to think outside the box, that definitely goes hand in hand with creativity. And the research has kind of divided creative thinking into two categories. There's convergent thinking and divergent thinking. And convergent thinking is when you take two kind of unlike ideas and you combine them in a new and interesting way. And divergent thinking is more expansive. It's thinking about the word cold, for example, and then words that rhyme with the word cold. And they're not necessarily related, but it helps you to think about the word cold in new ways and possibly from different angles that you wouldn't have thought of it before. And a study done also at Stanford University showed that we can really practice and hone in on this convergent thinking. So if you practice this regularly, you can improve your ability to think creatively in a convergent way. Divergent thinking, on the other hand, you actually, this is an excuse to go out and relax. Maybe not go out, stay in and relax. But divergent thinking is is most effective when you're relaxed. You can't really practice it, but you can be in put yourself in different scenarios. It really thrives in the wild. So this is kind of why you might have some of your best ideas in the shower, or why the DNA double helix was discovered in a bar, or gravity was discovered under an apple tree. This is when some of these most creative thoughts and realizations can come to us. And so I'd like to share with you another Food Panda related project where we had found a number of behaviors that were associated with long-term retention. And these behaviors, according to the data, seem to be lead to somebody being the best kind of user. And we wanted to promote our users to do this. So what we did was we started by sending out a lot of one-off campaigns, trying to encourage this type of behavior, sometimes incentivize, sometimes not. And we just weren't getting the significance that we wanted to. And we kind of asked ourselves, okay, well, why are we doing this? And we thought, okay, well, this would work for me. So why isn't it working for our customers? But it turns out we needed to think about this in a different way and challenge this assumption that we had that if something would work for us, that it would work for our customers. So going back also to the false consensus effect. And we needed to find a way to think creatively about this problem. And so we ended up thinking about it from the perspective of badges. We thought, okay, this is kind of a form of convergent thinking where we're thinking about a badge program and actions that we want users to take and combining these together in the way that we form a badge program off of these actions. So where the challenges reflect the behaviors that we want our customers to do. And needless to say, it was also thanks to our design team, an adorable GIF-filled experience where they were, the badges got colored in and animated as the users were unlocking them. We also incentivized some of the badges, but not others. And that was also going back, harkening back to Muriel's work, this idea where users or customers enjoyed this, this feeling of the hunt and finding out which badges were incentivized and which ones weren't. And in the end, this is one of our most successful campaigns for retaining users and increasing order frequency and retention. So the third step of unconventional thinking is rinse and repeat. This goes back to the quote from Piaget about, what you see in the world influencing what you know, and what you know influencing the way that you see the world. You're always changing. The more that you see and that you experience, the more that changes the way that you see the world. So the more you need to question whether or not what you're seeing is just based on what you know, or if it's also based on what you've proven. and then continually testing, continually questioning. This is an agile, dynamic process, which should be ongoing for the best outcome in retaining your customers. So some key takeaways that I would like to share with you today also tie in some other industries and some outside stories of that tie back to the key learnings that we've covered so far. One of them is, if you've read Freakonomics, you might be familiar with this. The idea, or there was some data that showed that the number of storks in a town was directly correlated with the number of babies being born. And so one might derive from this data that because these two things are correlated, that actually the storks are delivering the babies. And this is a classic example of people trying to show that correlation does not equal causation, because it was actually a completely different reason that the storks were coming into the town and that the numbers were increasing with each other, although it did have something to do with the babies being in the homes. And this goes to say also that the strongest hypothesis has the least assumptions. So if you think, okay, the storks are bringing the babies, that would have a lot more assumptions inherent in that idea than saying, okay, maybe the storks are in the homes because the homes tend to be warmer for longer periods of time, and that's actually what's bringing the storks. Or another example is Betty Crocker. The business side thought, okay, this is people like simple, so we like simple, people like simple, let's make it simple. And they the mixes were just add water for a while, which actually ended up flopping for very interesting reasons. But which is why we now still have to add eggs and oil and milk into cake in order to make our Betty Crocker cake mixes. So that goes to say data-driven insights are better than using this false consensus effect or assumptions that we might have. And lastly, there was an experiment at the Stanford Business School where groups of students were given $5, and the winning group was the one who could make the most money from this $5. And a lot of the groups use the $5 to buy supplies and make things to sell. It's a very traditional model. It's kind of conventional wisdom-esque, but then a different group actually ended up selling their presentation time to students who, or to a company that was interested in hiring these students. And they ended up making the most money of any of the groups, which goes to say, yeah, the most obvious answer isn't always the one that's in front of you, isn't always the best one. Sometimes it's important to think out of the box. You can come up with something even better. So on Monday, I challenge you, if you're up for it, to look at places in your work where you're making assumptions and find ways that you can test them. And a little hint here is that it helps to ask someone from outside your team, because they might bring an interesting perspective to the work that you're doing. Also, a little Delivery Hero plug, we're hiring. If you're interested in working with us and thinking outside the box to create cool things, please reach out to me either through SwapChat or SwapCard, or on LinkedIn. And lastly, thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope that you all can use this to go forth and break the box and create really great retention strategies and tactics.
Well, thanks, Catherine. That was great. It's more of a TED talk, I think, than App Promotion Summit talk. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's everyone being at home, but yeah, the quality of presentations and, you know, especially that one has been really great today. Thank you. You know, we would have dreamed to have, you know, even one talk like that, you know, 7 years ago, so 8 years ago even. So yeah, definitely the state of app growth and app marketing is very healthy, and that was fantastic.
Thank you.
There's a few people, if you've got questions, yeah, Catherine's going to drop by in the chat. There's a lot of good feedback going in. I just have one sort of briefly is, you know, when you're bringing this kind of, you know, academic stuff and trying to apply it, you know, how did you convince the sort of teams and stakeholders internally? I can imagine some places I've worked, you know, even with very sophisticated people, would be a bit like, okay, this is, you know, from a, you know, university textbook, kind of, why are you bringing this to our meeting? You know, kind of, you know, so how have you got any advice for people trying to inject this into their organization and convince the you know, different people to use it?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question, because I do see how there could be pushback, you know, in the workplace for academic thinking. But I'm very lucky to be on a team that encourages this, or at least my manager is a big fan of this type of thinking. And the way that we've been able to convince upper management is through running these experiments and showing that this works. And we typically will start, we're actually working on really bringing even more experimentation mentality and this behavioral psychology mindset to the team. And we run very lightweight experiments at first to prove our theories, and we can show real impact in those. And then we get sign off typically from those to actually build out larger frameworks and larger and bring even more of this into the workplace. So figure out what kind of the least effort is that you can put into building out something which brings this theory into your work, and then use that data in order to prove that this works and that this is something that you should do more of.
Great. Okay, well, I'll let you answer everyone else's questions in the chat. And yeah, just want to say, you know, a huge thank you for putting that together. That was absolutely fantastic. And yeah, hope to see you in person maybe next year in Berlin, and maybe we can do a real deep dive kind of workshop into it, and be interested to hear any updates, and maybe we can keep following this, you know, wonderful sort of train of thought you've created. So yeah, thanks so much.
I'd love that. Thank you. And I look forward to chatting with everybody offline.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Great.
All right. We've got the App Growth Awards coming up. So I think, yeah, there's some roundtables going on in private if you signed up for them. And of course, there's a lot more content next week. This is our last actual presentation for the day. So that was a great way to end. And we have, yeah, the App Growth Awards. If anyone's entered that, that'll be going on to a bit later. So, all right. Thanks.